Hello, everyone. My name is Amalina, and I'm a paper conservator. I have learned through apprenticeship in Italy. So my mentor and I met in 2011. And on and off from then, I have worked in Europe. I've worked a bit in India. But today is going to be different than a lot of the talks I do. And I'll get to it. I am going to give you a full warning. I have ADHD, so sometimes I lose track of what I'm saying. Be patient with me and I will come back to my thoughts. It may take me a few seconds. I wanted to start this by showing you some images. These are just images that are from the work I've done or the things I've seen. This particular book where I'm uncovering the spine had a hidden manuscript in one corner. The other one on the left is a handwritten record from the 1500s that was covered in parchment, and the parchment had writing on the inside. So in a sense, it was two documents. This on the right is a close-up of a 1500s manuscript. The manuscript itself was about 2.5 feet and bound in metal and wood. On the left, this is sort of the structure of the binding of this manuscript that I was trying to reproduce so that we could restore it. These are images, again, from some shelves with the library that I work in Italy. All these books are between 1300s to 1600s. A lot of them are on parchment. They are made of wood, cloth, metal. There are different kinds of inks. You can see on the right, there's a little bit of a manuscript peeking out that was used to rebind the book. A couple more images. This is a gold leaf illumination, and on the right, we found musical notations on the inside of one of the spines of the book in the library. This is a reconstruction, again, that I was doing of, sorry, I've gone ahead. A reconstruction of one of the early bindings that you find in Europe. Now, in conservation, you may think that, I sit in a lab and I have all these specialized tools. The next photo is Mr. Sunil Birud of the Asiatic Library of Bombay. He is working with something that is a humidification chamber to flatten the different maps that are part of that collection. And by the way, there is a cartographic exhibition happening at the Asiatic, and I think it's open for the next week. I highly suggest you go there. Some of the maps there have been restored by myself and the team. And so if you're in the Fort area, especially Khaki lab, you should probably take some people there. There are some talks there as well. So just advertising that. This is a picture from the Asiatic lab again. This is a 7.5-foot map of Punjab from 1896, I believe. This map had to be restored on the floor because it would not fit on any of the tables in that lab. This is a picture of my bench in Italy. These are some of the tools that we use. Now, I know some of them look like household items, but just to give you an idea of the kind of equipment required. These are some of the chemicals, some of the adhesives, and I suppose what I'm trying to do is to give you a sense of conservation. We tend to think of it as a process that happens hidden away in museums, or a mysterious sort of space where conservation is this thing that is far away and then we don't have any access to it other than talks that are like this. And I want to disturb that a little bit. I want to bring conservation to you. And I think I'm going to do it by showing you some of these pictures that I took today. This is a book that I gave as a gift to someone. It is a book about the evolution of dogs that predates Charles Darwin. This is another book. It's from mid-1700s. I like to cook. And so as part of my collection, I have this small book of strange recipes. I also collect botanical prints. So now these are two of the prints that I've purchased, and I took them out of their frames to give you an idea. These are again from the 1800s. Here are some more dog prints. I have a lot of pets, so our house is sort of covered with animal paraphernalia. This is a 1797 print of Narcissus flower. This is my mother's favorite flower. And while I was examining the print on the right, you can see I held it up to the light by the window. And you can see the chain lines of where the paper was laid and a watermark in the corner. These are photographs and photo albums that were discovered in a garage in one corner. Garages in Bombay are not very safe. There had been a huge flood, and this wet cardboard box with hundreds of photographs and at least 20 albums had just been sitting there for a couple of years. So when we found these albums, we found the photographs to be warped out of shape. There was a lot of mold damage. The photograph in front, if you look at the corner, it's kind of purple, which is also the presence of mold. You can see how much damage has happened to the photograph because of where it was kept, because of the conditions. And honestly, these pictures were just forgotten. We rediscovered them in our house, but it was an accident. The photograph on the right is a picture of my grandfather, and I carry it around in my wallet. On the left is a trunk full of his papers and his father's papers. And this trunk was also left in the garage of my parents' house in Delhi. This is a photograph of my grandmother. So my grandmother she was a single mother to her two daughters. She lost everything in partition. And then she moved to India, and she used to play badminton competitively before she was widowed. And after she died, we discovered all these certificates and degrees. So after she was widowed, she was a young woman with two daughters, and she was a librarian. And she used to take evening classes every single day to increase her skills, to increase her grasp of languages. She had degrees in Gurmukhi, Russian language. She had an MPhil in library science. Her MPhil was about the old libraries in Old Delhi. Many of them are no longer there, other than the Hardayal library. This is another photograph of her. And I showed you when we started this, a number of the pictures from the European libraries and perhaps the collections in India and all the things we consider glamorous, things you'd like to see in museums, things that we see in historic libraries, things we see sort of in exhibitions. And all of those things are considered valuable. But I, as a conservator, in so many ways believe that this photograph means more to me than all the manuscripts I showed you before and all the paper I showed you before. And so where I'm going with this is, we can't think of paper and paper history as something that is alien, that exists outside of us, because paper is everywhere. As a material, it has, and perhaps that is why I'm so in love with it. From museums to libraries to schools to our families to grocery lists to letters that we write each other, paper is sort of a testament to humanity. We record ourselves, every little thing about ourselves, through paper. And our histories are not just those that are sitting protected by the four walls of external institutions. These histories belong to us. We have them in our homes. We find them in our garages in boxes that have been forgotten. We find letters in a suitcase. After you lose people in your family, you go through their things and you find things you did not know about their childhood. The documents that my grandmother left tell a story of partition. And those documents and her legacy is the history of my family. And so when I was asked to do this talk, I thought, okay, I can start talking about technical things. I can tell you about a project. I can talk about an object, but I don't want to do that. I want to be able to give you something to take away from here that will let you protect the history of your own collections. Conservation should not be something that is alien, external, and for so many people inaccessible. I fully believe that conservation can happen anywhere, by anyone, to at least some degree. We are the ones that protect the legacies of our families. We are the ones that create local histories. We are the ones that carry memories through generations, and paper is the medium that we've been doing that. So today, I'm actually going to talk about you and things you can do, and the principles of conservation that we can take. And in addition to the emotionality of paper, and in addition to sort of the intellectual and the abstraction of paper, we also take the material of it and we protect it by protecting that third component. So what is paper? This is a pretty straightforward answer. It is a plant fiber pulp that has been sized or made, the surface has been made resistant to ink so that ink doesn't flow into it. It is flattened, it is dried, and it has been used for nearly 2 millennia. Paper initially, the origin story of paper is about 150 AD from China. There was a courtesan called Kai Lun who has been sort of attributed as the maker, the inventor of paper. From China, it moved into East Asia. And then also along the Silk Route, it arrived in Samarkand around, I believe, the 8th century AD. It went into the Islamic world, it came to India, and by about the 1400s, it had hit Europe. So paper has been around, and paper, in addition to manuscript, have been used to sort of record for the past 2000 years. When we talk about paper, we talk about damage, right? The biggest risk to us, of course, is that paper will self-destruct. There are two kinds of damage that happen to paper. One is chemical damage or degradation. This is called inherent vice. And so in the history of paper, paper prior to the Industrial Revolution was made of either cloth rag or plant fiber. It was handmade. It was beaten into a pulp. Often there were additives that were alkaline in nature. And so this paper had two properties. One is its fibers were really long, and the other is it was pH neutral or slightly alkaline. This made that paper a lot more flexible and a lot less brittle. So paper prior to the 1800s, you find it'll last a lot better than paper post-industrialization. So suddenly in the 1800s, there was a big demand for paper. There were higher literacy rates. The British actually in India outlawed the use of anything other than mechanized, mechanically made paper for correspondence, at least government correspondence. And so we had paper shift from this handmade process to an industrialized mass production process. A few things happened there. People started using wood, and the wood would be cut mechanically, and then alum was added to it. Now, in this process, the wood fibers that were cut became very short, and the additives became acidic. This combination has made post-1800s paper very brittle. I like to say that prior to the 1800s, paper used to tear. Post-1800s, paper, after aging, almost breaks like a sheet of glass. It shatters, it doesn't tear. Unfortunately, and this is the reality for a lot of us, our family documents or the things we are trying to protect are all papers that are post the 1800s. So some of the challenges that we will have in our own family collections is that you will find paper that is incredibly fragile and prone to crumbling. I'm going to keep that in mind as we move through the rest of this presentation, just so that when you do try and take some steps to protect that paper, we can make decisions about it based on the inherent qualities of that. I want to make a note here too, actually. One is that inks, pigments, and dyes, they also have different rates of degradation, especially some of the earlier inks that were popular in the 1800s. There's an ink called iron gall ink, And if you look at archives, you will find that paper that is written with iron gall ink is almost eaten through. The chemical degradation of photographs is a slightly different field. So when I say I'm a paper conservator, I don't work in the conservation of photographs. If there are a lot of you who have collections of photographs that you're concerned about, at the end of this presentation, just write to me and I will get you in touch with people who can help you with the preservation of your photographs. This is an image just of the mechanized process of paper. This is the mass production. It's a picture from Europe. And what happened is, this is a map from the Asiatic Library collection. This is a map from 1855. As you can see, this paper did not tear as much as break into tiny fragments. Up in the front, you can see the little fragments that I then had to reassemble to create the whole map. And that's because this paper was so fragile and the fibers had gotten so short because of the acidity in it that it almost crumbled upon handling. This is this is from a 6-language dictionary. And it's from, I think, 1820 or 30. You can see the browning along the corners. And I wanted to show this because paper initially, when it's printed, is not this color. But when it starts browning like this, you can also, it tells you something about the acid content. The other kind of damage, other than chemical damage, is one kind. There is structural damage. Now, structural damage can happen for a lot of reasons. It can happen because you handled a book too much and you pulled at its spine. It can happen because it was dropped. Or maybe somebody shoved a stack of books and they pressed up against the wall. Structural damage can also happen because of natural or man-made disaster. There is also intentional damage, the intentional destruction of property. This is something that is quite common in war zones. It is common when there is communal violence. So cultural heritage objects as well as communities are targeted. And so intentional damage is also a form of structural damage. A lot of libraries in India have been burnt down. And so, yeah. There's also damage that happens just due to frequent use. You go to a library, you take out a book, you read it, you put it back in. 2 days later, somebody goes and takes out the same book. All that handling, the repetitive handling, is something that will eventually weaken the structure. There's also the degradation of the supports. This picture over here, it shows a parchment-bound spine. If you look inside, you can see the original cords. And then you see that the spine has split. And at some point, somebody just took this thread and tried to stitch bits of it back together, not very well. And so the parchment has split again. Another form of structural damage is pest damage. We'll be talking more about this later, but insects, rodents, even birds, they can cause structural damage by eating or tearing or even living within paper collections. These are 2 examples of structural damage. This one on the left is a map, and where you see the large sort of losses is where the coating on the map came off because of repetitive rubbing. The second picture on the right is a little cookbook here. And when I bought it, I realized it did not have a back cover. You can see on the spine, the back cover is entirely missing. There is some amount of browning, but the paper is good quality because it's from the 1700s, not the 1800s. So I got lucky with that. This is a map that belongs to my friend Mrinal, who I think has done a talk with Khaki as well. This map, this print was shipped from the UK, I believe. And it arrived in this condition. And Mrinal called me and he said, well, can you take a look at it? And we tried to figure out where the damage had happened, because before shipping in the UK, a photograph was taken of the print and it was fine. We realized after studying the tear patterns that the tear angle told us that somewhere in customs, a very heavy object was put on top of this print. And because the frame was hollow, over time, it just pressed down. And so this big loss that you see in the center is the result of just a heavy package being put on a print in customs. And so if you are a person who likes to order prints, please ensure that they come on a mounting board and not on a frame, because we have no control over what happens in customs, but you may end up with damage like this. Okay, let's talk about damage that is common, especially in Bombay, where it is very wet and very humid. Termites are everywhere. You can see in the lower picture on the right, those pinholes are where termites have burrowed through the leather and then the wood. On the above, that stack of papers looked perfectly fine to me on first glance. But then I started going through them, and about 40 or so sheets in, suddenly there's this massive lacuna, and we have about 100, 150 sheets in the center of the block that have just been eaten through. So if you look at the upper picture, you can also see this brown residue. That's a very good sort of indicator that you have an active termite infestation, because termites will eat the paper and then they will excrete it. The excreta is called frass. And one of the ways to tell if you have an active termite infestation is if you remove all the dust from a shelf and you brush all the dust off your book or your paper and you put it back, and a few weeks later, you find that similar sandy dirt, you can conclude, of course, that there is an active infestation. You should probably do something about it. What are the risks here? I've already said the humid environment. Another risk is, and people don't think about this a lot, but if your paper is stored in a cupboard, you must also ask the question, where is the cupboard? Is the cupboard against a wall? Is that a wall that is prone to leaking? Because if you have a wall that is prone to leaking, and then you have a wooden cupboard, you're likely to have a high transfer of humidity, and it's a great environment for termites and beetle larvae. Limited air circulation is also a problem. Where you have good air circulation, you don't have the conditions that a lot of pests prefer. External storage I added because I mentioned those photographs that we found in the garage. Now, I know a lot of us don't have a lot of storage space in our homes, so we tend to put things towards the outside, or we have an outside storage space for them as well. When it comes to paper documents, you need to be careful about that, because external storage is not checked as often as the storage within your homes. And you may find, like we did, that a few months or years down the line, you have whatever you've stored over there is completely destroyed. This again is a photograph of the frame of that print, this one. And I wanted to show you the frame because towards the bottom of the frame, you can see a lot of dust. Now, initially, I thought this was just dust. Then I looked at it carefully and I realized a lot of it was also insect excreta, so frass, which made sense because this wooden frame that had the print had been glued to actually had been eaten by termites from one of the sides. So we're not going to be putting the print back onto this frame at all because the print has been damaged and the frame has termite damage on it. So what do we do when we find out you have an infestation? The first step is you find out if it's an active infestation. What does that mean? It means you take a magnifying glass and you see if you can see any insects. Sometimes you can't see the insects particularly clearly. So then you look at the dirt that is around the books or the paper that you're looking at. If you take the dirt and you brush it onto a white piece of paper and look at it under a magnifying glass again, you'll be able to tell if there are any insect exoskeletons in it. If you clean up the dirt from a shelf and you put your books back in, 2 weeks later, check to see if there's any of that grainy powder again. Because if there is that grainy powder again, it means you have an active insect infestation, even if you may not be able to see it. You need to dry the paper. Now, termites, beetle larvae, paper is made of cellulose. add humidity to that, and it's the perfect environment for breeding. So if you dry it out, you make an inhospitable environment. How does one dry it out? You can put it in a room that is well ventilated and has good air circulation. People say that you should not put books, prints, inks, artwork by the sun, and that is largely right. But if you do have an insect infestation, indirect sunlight is very effective for drying out paper. You need to brush away all the debris. So just take a hog hair brush and remove whatever you can, soft, gently from the surface. Clean the storage space. The storage space is critical to preventing pest infestations. If the storage space is made of wood, you need somebody to take a look at the wood to see if it has been compromised, because termites will eat paper, but they will also eat wood. As a long-term thing, you get those packets of silica, the ones that you find in pill bottles, and they have those little ones to keep the pill bottles dry. If you go onto Amazon, and again, everything I suggest to you is available in India, and I will share the places you can buy it. But on Amazon, you can get silica packets that are 100 grams, so they're about that big. And I put one on each end of a bookshelf. There is also a moisture absorber called Absorbia. You get that in packets and in plastic containers. That is also good for small to medium storage spaces where you may be worried about the humidity, because not everybody can have a dehumidifier that is working 24/7. So these are easy ways to ensure that you keep the humidity of a space down. There are some traditional methods, and I know that different regions in the country and different families have different beliefs about how to do this. I know that in my family, neem leaves are dried and put into packets, and those are put into shelves. I know that camphor is burned in the room because it is to act as an antifungal. These methods do exist, but I would suggest one, read up on them to see if there's any negative impact. And the other is that there are methods like silica packets, absorbia packets that you can use to prevent high humidity. The bottom line is, if you have an active infestation or a recurring infestation or a lot of damage, like you see on the books on the right of the screen, you may have to call a conservator. But before you call a conservator, this is a list of steps that you can take, and it's fully within your control. Mold and fungal growth is something that is incredibly common in this part of the world. The picture on the right is a mix of black and white mold. These books were kept on a floor, and what we didn't realize was that the floor was flooded it was leaking upwards. So water had collected under the floor and was coming up through the floor. So if you looked at it from the top, you couldn't tell. But when you looked at the books from the bottom, this is the condition they were in. Mold again grows where there is less air circulation, where the temperatures are warmer, and where the environment is damp. With mold again, what do? You dry the paper. You need to be careful about where you're drying the paper because mold can be dangerous. So I would not say bring it into your kitchens or into your bedrooms and dry it. But if you can, in a veranda on a slightly sunny day, put it out there. Again, not in direct sunlight, but in indirect sunlight. Once the mold is dry, how do you know it's dry? Mold will always feel wet on the fingers. When it does not feel wet, when it doesn't smear, is a good indicator of the fact that the mold that was growing has been deactivated. So you can remove it with a brush. The problem with mold is that it is effectively permanent. Mold spores you can't get rid of them. Where there is even one tiny mold infestation, it is likely to happen again. So when you are trying to get rid of the mold spores, you should use a mix of 30% deionized water, 70% ethanol. You need to add the water so that the ethanol can penetrate the mold spore. This is still not 100% solution. So you're going to have to keep an eye. Monitoring is critical for your family collections. And it is something that you can do quite regularly if you get into the pattern of doing it. So every 3 months, just take a look at where your books, your documents, your photographs are kept. Because prevention is far better than having to, eventually deal with this photograph on the right. The risks of this, of course, are regrowth, and mold stains are difficult to remove. So again, we are talking about preventive steps, and so much of conservation is about taking preventive steps. Yeah, this is another close-up of those same books. You can see the black mold growth as well as the white. Mold comes in a lot of colors. I have seen bright yellow mold. I have seen bright purple, vivid purple mold. I have seen pink mold. Largely, you will find fungal growth in black and white. But if you find something that looks a bit suspicious but is not one of these two colors, please still take a closer look at it. Okay, this is very straightforward. You must clean your papers. The easiest way to do this is with a soft bristle brush. It's hog hair or like a really good quality synthetic brush. You can also use something called spoke sponge or a vulcanized rubber sponge. The photograph on the left bottom is the vulcanized rubber sponge, and you can just cut pieces of it with a pair of scissors. It's much easier to cut the sponge as opposed to using the whole block. So when you have small pieces that you can easily control, gently rub it over the surface of the paper. It'll pick up all the debris that's on top and embedded in the paper. Tears and mending. Now, when I'm in a lab, I work with Japanese tissue, I work with Japanese paper, I work with some Indian papers. We undertake very complicated reconstruction processes. It took me a very long time to learn how to do them correctly, and I'm still learning every time I encounter a new document. You don't need to reproduce that, but what we can learn from that is there's certain materials that are safe for the mending and for mending tears and other structural issues with your papers and books. The easiest is to get this document repair tape from Line Co. It's made of Japanese paper. It has a glue on it, which is, it's literally like a tape, but the glue is document safe. It's not going to degrade and cause damage to your document. Again, you can buy this at a website called Tanotis. You can buy it on Amazon. The central picture is pH neutral adhesive. In the lab, I use 4 or 5 different adhesives that are all they're all conservation grade. Nobody is asking you to cook the adhesive in your own home. You don't need to get those expensive materials. But if you do need to glue something, please ensure that the glue you're using is a pH neutral archival glue. Fevicol has, which I see most commonly used, has a pH between 3 and 4. So a lot of the glues that are available on the market in the long term can actually cause a lot of damage to your documents. This one is a tricky one. So many of our older documents have been repaired using tape. Tape, unfortunately, one, the adhesive causes a lot of damage. You can see in the image, the tape has browned this newspaper. The other is it's not easy to remove. So, excuse me. So if you see tape on any of your documents, you need to weaken the adhesive. That's the first one. Just use a hairdryer at the lowest heat. Short exposures on the tape, just blow at it. See if it'll come off with a butter knife once the adhesive has been softened. And when you're pulling tape off a document, do not pull upwards. Pull at 180 degrees, directly opposite. If you pull upwards, you're going to tear the paper. If you pull in the opposite direction, you're going to be able to get the tape off without lifting the paper fibers. Whatever residue you have that is left over from tape, you can use a Q-tip and a bit of ethanol and remove it. Again, if you need to do repairs, use this kind of tape, not sellotape or any other kind of tape you get in the market. Only the document repair tape, which is designed specifically for this purpose. I told you that post-industrialization paper has a very high level of acidity. In a lab, we deacidify paper using a number of methods. A lot of them involve water or are aqueous. This is difficult to do at home, and also if you have a huge volume of documents. This is something that I recommend to people to keep at home for their own collections. This is a non-aqueous, so non-water-based deacidification spray. It's magnesium oxide, so you just spray it on the paper, and it sort of deposits the magnesium oxide on the surface of the paper, which eventually will penetrate through. I usually suggest repeating this maybe once every 10 years, but it's good to have, especially if you have newspaper clippings or letters that were written and are really brittle or acidic. So this is something that if you want to protect, it's not inexpensive, but it is an investment. Its long-term benefits are definitely worth it. So this is from a company called CTS. They have a supplier in Delhi. Again, if you want to get it, reach out to me and I'll tell you how. Okay, storage boxes and envelopes. Storage is a huge part of the battle when it comes to protecting your collection. As I mentioned before, if your storage is compromised, if the storage is in a cupboard that is against a damp wall, if your shelf is directly in front of an air conditioner that is turned on and off, if your storage is in a leaky part of the house and maybe water is seeping in, that of course all causes damage, but the longevity of documents is in making good storage choices. Why? Because a document spends 99% of its life in storage. You're not looking at your family records every single day. You take them out once in a while. The rest of the time, they're going to be kept away. Storage is where you can really be able to control the continued degradation of an object. We've talked about how to keep the space dry. And now what you can do also is take documents. On the right at the bottom is a small model of an archival box. If you have loose papers, it's a good idea to keep them in a archival grade box. An archival grade box is, firstly, it's pH neutral. So the board doesn't have acid in it. These boxes are expensive if you buy them as is. However, you can just purchase the archival board and have the boxes made. This linen hinging tape, which is the photograph in the center, is also something you can use to reinforce the outsides of the box. So if you have to make the fold and then stick the two parts, instead of using an adhesive that may be acidic or you don't know the exact components, you can just use the linen hinging tape. When you have documents that are highly acidic, also just try and see if you can interleave them with this acid-free tissue, especially if you're looking at newspapers. The issue with acidic paper is not only that one sheet is acidic, it is that it can transfer it. So acid can transfer through contact. So if you have one non-acidic paper and one acidic paper, the acidic paper can affect the other one. So if you have large quantities of paper, it's worth investing in acid-free tissue just to interleave all of it while you store it. All of these, again, are available on Tanotis, on Amazon.com. They are all in India. They may look expensive to you in the sense that's 1,000, 2,000 rupees. But if you're thinking about the longevity of your family documents, these are good things to keep in mind. There are also things called mylar envelopes where people can store prints, sometimes photographs. And then there are on the right archival grade envelopes where you can put in photographs or other papers. The four Club Conservation, Tanotis, Amazon, and Talus.com are where you can purchase these. Last thing I'm going to talk about is mounting corners, because for a lot of us, we want our family photographs in albums. If you start putting adhesives on the back of a photograph, that can cause damage. Instead, there are these these corners that have adhesive on them. And if you stick them to the shape of the size of the photograph, you can just slip the photograph into the corner. So it holds it, but there's no adhesive contact. And that way you can also remove them if you need to. Okay, so this is the information that I'm giving you. I hope the rest of the talk, you can talk about your specific questions about your collections. And again, to just try and bring it back, the idea is to take these things that we know from the field of conservation and to be able to apply them to the things around you that you want to conserve. Your own family histories, your histories of paper, your own documents, everything from the drawings your kids made to maybe land deeds, to maybe, memories that you have that are your family's histories that perhaps people outside of you will not recognize, but you, they're a pretty integral part of just the way we live. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amalina. That was most interesting. And the way you wove in the pictures and the tips was really great. Shall we look at the questions now?
Oh, yes, of course.
What do you believe is the future of the paper conservation industry or business?
Okay. The future of the paper conservation industry or the business. There's a lot of paper to conserve.
Mm-hmm.
We need a lot of conservators, but we also need to understand that conservation is not in the hands of conservators alone. It is something that we can all participate. And so the point of sharing this knowledge, we've learned it from our field. Are we the only ones who can do this work? No. Can you take preventive steps? Yes. So in some senses, we need more people to specialize in conservation, but we also need conservation to move into people's households, homes, low resource environments. I always say there is always a conservation choice you can make for the lowest possible budget. So yes, there is a future of conservation in two ways. One is we need more conservators, but the other is we need to be talking about conservation and how we can participate in it.
You mentioned purposeful destruction of paper. Are there any instances from Indian history where that's happened?
I mean, even if I'm just thinking about partition, a lot of documents there. There was communal unrest in Delhi in 2020 in January, and I know there was a lot of destruction of documents there. In 1984, a lot of Sikh collections were burnt. There was destruction in Pune at the Oriental Institute, I believe, where again documents were destroyed. A library was attacked. So everywhere that there is, paper is not apolitical. Where people are targeted, cultural heritage is also targeted.
True.
Yeah. And
what
so
a shame.
It is. I mean, cultural heritage, buildings, homes, artifacts, but paper is part of that history.
You mentioned neem leaves and silica packets. What about naphthalene balls? Are they okay to use on a small scale?
I would say no, because of the off gas. I always default to silica packets. And silica packets, the good thing is you can put them in there. Then when you feel a bit damp, you can go and put them in the sun and they dry. And so they can be reused. Naphthalene balls is something we are all very used to.
Yes.
We do have, everything smells of it. My grandmother's house smells. Yes. But why do that when there are alternatives available? Cheap alternatives. Yeah.
So moving on from naphthalene balls to camphor.
Yeah.
Prasad asks, what kind of camphor is to be burnt? Chemical or organic?
Organic.
Organic.
Yeah, but again, the steps you can take is air circulation, silica in shelves. If you can control the humidity and you can stabilize the temperature and humidity of the storage, these are things you don't have to do.
He also wants to know what should be the frequency of camphor burning. Should it be weekly or monthly?
So there was an archive where I think they used to do it every few weeks.
Uh-huh.
But the room always smelled of camphor.
Hmm.
Again, I've not studied extensively the effect that could have on a document, because a lot of these traditional methods, some of them work great and some of them don't.
Hmm.
So I will always go back to, instead of doing something where we are not necessarily aware of the outcome, go back to the basics, reduce the
Yes.
humidity, increase the air circulation, keep the temperature stable, monitor.
There was a question whether it's safe to do deacidification without knowing whether the paper is acidic or not. Do you have some tips in that regard?
If the paper is not acidic and you do deacidification to it, nothing bad is going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing bad will happen. The risk is if you have acidic paper and you don't take some steps to protect it. The additional risk is if you have acidic paper that comes in contact with non-acidic paper, acid can transfer. So your previously safe paper will then become acidic. Okay.
Another question was there any specific reason for watermarking by handmade paper manufacturers other than the obvious proving provenance?
It was basically like a industry mark.
Mhm.
If paper has been made at this mill,
Mhm.
this is the product. There were coats of arms. Sometimes there were dates. Sometimes there were just little designs. When paper was initially being made, it was a very valuable commodity, and people wanted other people to know where the paper came from. So you hold it up to the light, you can see the watermark, and you're like, oh, it came from this mill. This is the quality of the paper.
So yeah, it was some kind of assurance, you're saying?
Assurance, provenance, but it's like, you have 20 manufacturers who make 20 different kinds of soap that come into the market. Each of them has a brand on it, no? That's pretty much the same.
The question was whether you have any experience in conserving railway timetables. I guess the person who's asking the question must be a collector of railway timetables.
I have not done a project of railway timetables. I would absolutely, it's paper, of course. It depends.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to take a look at it, but yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay. And staying with timetables, there was a question whether you have any experience of conserving stamps and currency notes. Or Ashish wants to know if you have any suggestions for preserving these.
Again, we've talked a bit. I've only touched on different storage techniques, envelopes. The rule of thumb is try and ensure that whatever you're storing the object in is archival grade. For photographs, for stamps, for folders, all of these things, if you go onto the websites that I have marked, you'll be able to find some very specialized kinds of storage as well. So if you're talking about stamps and currency notes, one, of course, I would think about the adhesive on the back of the stamp. And if that is in any way damaging the stamp, is the stamp one that has been used or not used? Has the stamp, has it the tappa of it being mailed from one place to another? So those are the kinds of things you need to look into. If you have stamps and you're interested in philately, then go and look at there are specific books of archival grade material where you can put stamps in. You will probably find them on the website. Yeah.
I suppose the same thing would apply to matchbox labels.
Yes.
So that answers Prasad's question. And moving on, Rinal wants to know, for deacidification of paper at home, could you tell us how precisely the spray that should be used?
So the spray, the bookkeeper spray is, it tends to have a sediment at the bottom. So you need to give it a good shake. The fluid is whitish, and it dries immediately on contact. Usually the distance is about 8 to 10 inches from the paper so that you have a good spray of the aerosol. Is it as effective as submerging paper, that method of aqueous deacidification? No, but is it better than nothing? Yes. Is it something that over time extends the lifespan of your documents? Absolutely. But it's a very simple system. You just need to ensure the sediment is shaken up. On some of them, there's a pump, and on some of them, there's a hand spray. This is actually the same liquid is used on a wider scale for large archives with a pressure pump. So you can buy it as 15 liters with a compressor. So it's not that this is just the at home. This is something that is being used where there's high volume.
Okay.
Yeah.
TG has a question. He says he has got a few documents and journals from the early 1900s, which are kept in a cupboard in an air-conditioned office. How can he improve air circulation? And is there any ideal temperature and humidity level?
So in an air-conditioned office, is the office air-conditioned 24/7? That is the first question. If there is an AC, is the AC pointing directly at the cupboard? If the temperature of the office is stable, then just having silica packets in the cupboard. And by air circulation, I also mean opening the cupboard, checking everything, ensuring that, you have, and you can get a humidity and temperature monitor quite cheaply. You can get them on Amazon. It's a little device that you put a battery and you just stick it in the cupboard. It'll tell you a lot about the conditions and whether they remain stable. Because the thing that is very dangerous to paper documents, actually a lot of organic objects, is when the humidity and temperature keep fluctuating. Even if it's not ideal, if it's not within the 40 to 60% of relative humidity range, going upar niche is the problem. So if it's not ideal temperature, not ideal humidity, but it's stable, that is much safer.
Priya wants to know whether the digitizing process, does it compromise the book's condition?
Yes, yes, it does. Not a lot of people want to talk about it because we think that the future of conservation is
digitization.
And I fully acknowledge the importance of the digitization of at-risk documents. The fact that digitization gives access to a lot of people, that it is changing the way we engage with libraries. However, let's see if I have a book here. All right, we'll use this. Every time you open a book to digitize this, you are doing that. If you're pressing it open, the spine is, and if you try and press a book flat, a book must always be like this, right? A lot of people don't have access to the V-shaped digitizers. And so they use a scanning type, which does this. The other thing is the people doing digitization, there are handling protocols. You can't just grab a sheet of paper and put it on something, right? You need to know how it needs to be lifted. Is the sheet of paper compromised? Is it weak? What are the weak parts of it? So while digitization is critical in terms of access and preservation, it needs to be done carefully and needs to be done in conjunction with conservation. It is not a replacement. And I always say to people, would you take a 360 picture degree of the Taj Mahal and then tear it down to build a parking lot? No. So why do you think you can take a picture of a document or a manuscript and just leave it there? We invest in the protection of monuments, despite them being recorded quite extensively. We need to do the same thing with paper.
Great point. Adil wants an estimate from you of how much it would cost him to conserve one old book. He's got a lot of antiquarian books from the 1800s and some old cloth-backed maps.
It depends.
I know, difficult question without seeing the...
It depends on the condition. You know, if you come and you show me a book and it's got a little bit of damage, maybe the spine is a little bit weak. It could be a 20-minute job. It could mean, that much material and it's done. It's just a small structural support. On the other hand, if it's a very damaged book and you want it restored to a certain, you want it to rebound, you want the paper conserved, that could be a completely different price. It's some maps that I've restored for the Asiatic Library cartographic project. Some of them took me 1 or 2 days. Some took me 3 months. The amount of effort, material, it depends. Everything depends on that. So no, I can't give you a number. What you can do, and I'm going to put my email address into this, is send me a photograph and I will happily tell you what needs to be done. You're
Prem wants,
welcome.
sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. Prem wants to know how you look at artificial intelligence tools for paper conservation.
What are artificial
Is
intelligence?
there, I was going to ask you, is there such a thing? Or Prem, would you like to elaborate on your question? You can unmute and talk.
Am I being made obsolete already with artificial intelligence tools?
We'll get back to Prem and his question a little later.
It's an extension of digitization.
Oh, acha.
Yeah.
So do you mean the tools used for digitization or just digitization in general?
No, the recovery through after digitization. See, once we scan, it is on some level, and then there is some AI used to fine tune it.
Oh, you mean when they digitize something, and then after the digitization, you sort of do a restoration or you touch
Yes.
up the image?
Yeah.
Is that
Yes.
what you're saying?
Yes.
Digitized are used for two things. One is to share the information. I look at a lot of digitized manuscripts to look at their condition, to assess some of the original features of them. I think it may be worth it if we need to look at this in two ways. Do you digitize to have an image, an accurate image of the condition it is in that tells you everything you could possibly know about a piece of paper? Or do you digitize it so you can optimize access to the written information? There are some things that you can do to bring out the colors of the ink or to fill in the lacunae. And these are all things that can be done through retouching online and post-digitization processes. I think it's worth doing both. If you have one image and then you need to perhaps increase the contrast or, try and pull out the text in different ways, it's okay to edit that image, have it accessible so that people can get to the text, but you can't lose the original one. Because for someone like me, I need to look at the material of it. I'm less interested in the writing. In fact, I'm not interested in the writing. I want sort of when I look at a manuscript online, I'm looking at the binding, I'm looking at the paper, I'm looking at the damage. And if that is lost in the I can't do a reference between a manuscript that it's digitized and a manuscript I'm working on then. And so that's a loss for me. So if anything, I'd say both. I can't hear you. I think you've muted yourself.
No, that's
Yashi wants to know how she can reach out to a conservator for her personal collections. I guess your email would putting your email over there would help.
Yes, I have put my email over there.
All right.
Honestly, I would like there to be more of a network of conservators. I think if you reach out to archivists, firstly, archivists will be able to get you in touch with some conservators. I'm a very big fan of working with smaller collections because for me, institutions do get a lot of funding. Smaller collections don't. Low resource areas don't. Maybe this is something we need to work on. We need to have a way for people to be able to reach out to conservators directly, just even if it's for a consultation. But yes, you have my email address. And if you tell me, what you need, I can direct you to people. And that stands for everyone.
All right, moving on. Amita's question is, how do you preserve very old property papers from tearing? I guess all of the above.
All of the above.
Or is there anything specific that you want to say about?
All of the above. It's about the paper, it's about the storage, it's about the ink, it's about the age, it's about what kind of damage has happened to it. If, whatever I covered in this talk and you have specific questions for me and I, can reach out to you over email, if after all of that, there is still a problem, that's when you'd say, okay, can a conservator come over and take a look at them? But yeah, all the things that I've told you about storage, about these are all things that you should definitely.
I think the next question is similar and probably can be answered with all of the above. How can Susan save important documents which are tearing when she touches them?
That's I would call it breaking, not tearing.
It
means that they're highly acidic. They're from the 1800s onwards. They're from that evil era of paper, because when We only figured out that paper was really acidic and that was breaking the paper down several decades after the production, because it takes time for it to reach there. If you have very brittle documents that you cannot handle, put them in one of those Mylar envelopes that don't have glue on it. Put it there and then reach out to a conservator and say, hey, what can I do about this? Because you don't want further degradation while you're waiting for a solution. So sort of as a midpoint, if you can't handle it, try and get it in one of those envelopes, and they are rectangles and they're closed on two sides. So you don't have to push it in from the top, you just slide it inside.
Slide it in.
Yeah.
How do book collectors prevent their paperbacks from getting yellow?
Paper ages. That's the answer. Paper ages. Paper changes color over time. If you control environmental variables as much as you can, it slows down the process. But paper is organic. Everything that begins must end. Paper does have a lifespan. Paper does age. You know how you say you can smell old books? That's because of certain breakdowns in the process that you can eventually smell. Like every organic object will at some point.
Last question from Adil. Does a deacidifying solution damage any handwritten ink on paper?
So the reason I was talking about dry deacidification is, yes, it can. If you do aqueous, which is wet deacidification, so many of the inks, the pigments, the dyes, you put them in water, the water will immediately affect them. You don't want that ink to bleed. You don't want the pigment to be lifted off a painting. The reason I suggest this one thing for dry deacidification is precisely to bypass that. It dries on contact. It dries within 2 seconds of it landing on the paper. So you don't have time for the ink to bleed or for it to be affected. It's the easiest way to do something like that at home. And I only looked for it because I couldn't figure out years and years ago how to deacidify handwritten documents, which had carbon black ink, which is then susceptible to water. Yeah.
So you've picked up a lot of fans, Amalina, in the last 1 hour. Examples, excellent talk. Thank you very much. Wonderful talk, informative talk, very interesting talk, very interesting, helpful, and so on and on and on.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, of course. And
thank you so much for your time. And it was really great having you on board. And thank you to the audience. Please do come again and again for our talks. There was a question which was addressed to Khaki. The person who asked the question was, are you going to stop these talks? The answer to that is a very, very affirmative no. We are not going to stop these talks. And I wonder where you collected that information from. Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you so much. And please, everyone, if you want, reach out to me, even if it is just to send me a photo and write one sentence. I promise you, I will write back. I'm very invested in people's family collections, so do not hesitate at all.
All right, everybody, have a great weekend. All the best.
Thank you.